going to call to order the special meeting of Arts, Culture, and Historical Preservation Commission for July 1st, 2014. If everybody would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Chairperson Clower, Vice Chairperson Seals, Commissioner Hayes,
Present.
Commissioner Kloss,
Here.
and Commissioner Skoglund.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Anyone wishing to address the commission should fill out the request to speak form and present it to the clerk prior to the completion of the staff presentation. Doesn't look like we have any. All right. General administration, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the commission. The commission is prohibited by law from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to them at this time. Do we have any commission communications? Nothing? Presentations? I don't think we have any right now. Can I get a approval of the minutes for the March 31st, 2014 meeting? Need a...
I motion to approve the minutes of the March 31st meeting.
And John, you
I
second?
second that. Yes.
Second. Okay. Minutes are approved. Regular agenda, presentation, or Washington Neighborhood Historic Resources Survey, David Tilley.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Seamus Slaffy. I'm a junior planner. I'm here along with David Tilley to present the results of the Washington Historic Survey, which was carried out earlier this year, and also to receive feedback from the commission on potential policy options to be included in a future Washington specific plan update. So a brief overview, the historic survey was conducted in January of this year by members of the West Sacramento Historical Society and the Bright and Broader Community Action Network with guidance from city staff. The purpose of the survey was to inventory all the properties and all the structures within the Washington neighborhood to identify historic structures, and then to use this information to assist in updating the historic preservation policies within the Washington specific plan. So the survey found 65 structures that were in the Washington neighborhood that could be considered historic, and 29 of these are located within the historic overlay. The historic overlay, if we can get it on the screen, is the red box there in the middle right. So that's a 2-block area, and the Washington specific plan says the historic overlay is where all development should, or new development should be historic in nature. It should conform with the historic area. So to give an example of some of the historic structures that we saw, or that the survey members took pictures of, this is the first one. There's a couple of them here. We just want to go through them. These structures were, a lot of them were in nice condition. Some were like this one, not in as good a condition. They ran the whole gamut. So go to the last structure, so keep on going. Next one. So these are all right there near the historic overlay area. The next one, and then the next one. So this structure is actually, it's not historic. It was built in 2008, but it's included in the PowerPoint to show that structures could be built within the overlay that kind of blend into the neighborhood and look historic, but they aren't actually historic. And that's kind of what the overlay was intending to do. And to talk about more future developments such as this, David Tilley, turn it over to David Tilley.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. Tonight we are here to lead more to everything to lead up to a policy discussion for what will ultimately could be included in the Washington specific plan. There's a whole gamut of policy options, and we've listed a few tonight up in the PowerPoint and in your staff report for your consideration. There may be additional options, and these options also are not necessarily mutually exclusive, either. The Washington plan currently has some general policies, a lot of which are sort of replicated from the general plan about historic preservation, but in practical experience, they're likely, most people would probably say they're largely inadequate from a truly historic preservation, standpoint. We have been, I would say, moderately successful in preserving a lot of the historic structures in Washington. Some of them have, gone away on their own. Some of them have sort of, slowly, faded away because they haven't been, well maintained. But obviously, by results of the photos, and those are just a representative sample up there, there are numerous extant structures, still in that neighborhood that may be worthy of preservation, in one way, shape, or form. When we use the term historic in this context, it's sort of with the, infamous air quotes. We're not necessarily saying that any of these structures, would be placed on any type of, state or federal listing, although some of them may very well be eligible for that. But that would definitely require a lot more in-depth analysis on each property, later on to know if they would be eligible. But structures don't have to be, state or federally listed, to be worthy of preservation. And there's about a couple of dozen structures already listed in our general plan that are identified of at least of being locally historic. And so that's sort of the first tier, if you will, of historic buildings is, identifying them at the local level, and then some which may be eligible for listings, beyond that. So currently we do not have a citywide historic preservation ordinance. It has been something that's been discussed over time and has been in our work program off and on over the years. So that's certainly one way to, consider historic structures, not only in the Washington neighborhood, but really citywide, as there are numerous ones outside of the Washington district as well. The devil will be in the details of what that historic preservation ordinance would be and contain and how restrictive it might be, but it would be a place, potential place to start. In the Washington plan, and if we sort of go back just one slide to this this particular building here that's on 4th Street, this was a project I recall working on very closely back in 2007, 2008. This is right in what I consider to be the most sensitive, block in Washington, which is the block between E and D streets on 4th Street, is where the most significant high water Delta Victorians, remain. And this was a project that I would consider to be a success over there in that neighborhood. But we were fortunate at the time that the developer was very receptive, to doing, a project that was, architecturally compatible, with the late 1800s structures, on that particular block. Had he not been as receptive, it's really unknown if we have been able to get something like this that I still feel is fairly faithful to those, even though it's a modern, structure. So in going back to some of the policy recommendations, we definitely feel at the staff level that if it's our intent to maintain historic compatibility in those blocks, in particular where the overlay is and where the extant historic structures are, the plan definitely would benefit from having some more detail in it about what really is an appropriate style, not only style, but then how to achieve that. We're fortunate in that particular project where there were some very good examples on that street where we really borrowed from quite a bit. But that context is less present elsewhere in the district. And certainly we would want probably encourage any individual property owner, should they desire to pursue listing on any state or federal registries, should their properties be eligible. That's a fairly lengthy, process, and, we don't know all the ins and outs of it, but we think it would be valuable that any of those structures that would be eligible pursue that, and such that they can be a part of that database, and that it's known else outside our community. And for the, historic architecture buffs that are out there, we think it would be positive if, if those were available through that resource and people wanted to come to our community to look at it. There are potentially other options, so mainly tonight, we want to throw out at least a few for your consideration, but also sort of get your feedback about, historic preservation. We sort of presume that you're generally in favor of it, so it's more about how to do it than if to do it. And so that's sort of the substance of tonight's, discussion. And so we'd certainly welcome a good discussion with your commission about, how we might do a better job of historic preservation and historical accuracy, in the Washington district. But I think that, your feedback tonight could also be valuable, outside of that district as well, as particularly as we, update our general plan. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to your commission, and Seamus and I would be happy to have that discussion with you this evening.
Thank you. Commissioners have any questions?
I do. Are some of these houses abandoned? Because there's fencing around there and some maybe high.
And some of them may,
grass.
some of them may be, some of them are occupied. Washington has a very large absentee owner, about 3/4. That's sort of one of its challenges in the neighborhood. And so we'd like to see, obviously more property owner investment to help preserve some of these properties. Would be the most ideal way to go. And so we're actually hoping that these overall efforts in Washington, will improve that neighborhood and, hopefully return some values there where a lot of that, maintenance and upkeep, is hopefully more prominent.
A follow-up question to that: do you have a running list of where people are who own them? Because they could be not from West Sacramento, they could be in probate and sitting and parts of divorce disputes, and the houses just sit and the fences go up. So where owners are around.
No,
the
we do
state?
have all the assessor records of who the ownership, are of the properties. We haven't cross-referenced all those, see who's local and who isn't. It's probably a mixed bag, so that's why from a policy standpoint, if, property owners aren't, maintaining some of these properties, the way they should, some of our regulatory standards, can be used to, help compel that if it needs to be. We'd certainly want any of these properties not just to be maintained, but to be maintained in a way that preserves their historic integrity.
I ask that because if the owners are hard to get to and they're not abiding by codes currently, your good work is to identify what's architecturally important and needs preserving. But if you have absentee owners who are not abiding by codes, I guess that's my open question: is there violations where some of the homes are fenced and they become dwellings for the homeless, and they get sprayed on by people who mark them up and so forth? It gets. How do you make these folks accountable to the codes if there's any problems there?
Well, our code enforcement efforts can be very vigorous, and they do ultimately hold the property owners responsible to the most extreme situation where we can go to court and actually get a warrant and do the work ourselves and then lien the property, if the property owner doesn't comply. I mean, that's the most extreme scenario, but, that's a tool in our toolkit. And in my opinion, if we're talking about a historic building that has its historic integrity intact, we would want to use all those tools we could. But we do feel that, some of the policy language in the Washington plan probably could be a little stronger to give us that backing if we ever got to that scenario.
I've got a couple questions. So in 2012, the city was awarded $400,000 for the Community Challenge Planning Grant. I'm assuming that some of that money was used to carry out for to do the historical survey.
That's correct.
What is the balance that we have right now in there, and what is the plan for the use of the funds?
Well, this is one component of a, much larger, program we're looking at in Washington. Katie Jacobson can probably fill us in on where we're at in our budget figures, but this is a grant we need to close out, by the end of this calendar year. So we're well down the path on this. We're looking at a lot of things in this neighborhood. This is only one of maybe a dozen different, components.
Okay.
So, and all this is leading to what will ultimately become formal updates, to the Washington plan, which is about 20 years old now and is sort of difficult to work with in, 2014 and going forward.
Is any of the funding that we have available to help some of those infrastructures in upgrading or fixing up what currently, because we saw some, some of those places that were pretty dilapidated that, need help. Obviously, homeowners are responsible, but at the same time, if there's a grant there available for us to help a little bit, is that something that we can do?
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Katie Jacobson, a Program Manager with the Community Development Department. The grant is the grant is intended to look at strategies for shifting development patterns in the city to sustainable development in the Washington neighborhood, and includes significant portion of the grant is currently right now evaluating the infrastructure, the underground and above ground infrastructure. The underground, we're evaluating the condition of the underground infrastructure in terms of identifying current deficiencies that need to be repaired, but also looking at the planned streetcar route and the planned densities that need to be built, and looking at pipe sizes. And in addition, as you probably are well aware, sustainability strategies are really focused on walkable, connected, appealing neighborhoods. And so we're doing a lot of work on the circulation element, and where there's streets that need significant frontage improvements and widened sidewalks, street lights, things like that. All of these layers of the strategies will come together in specific plan updates and financing plans, implementation plans as we move forward. And in the public participation sessions that we've had, the residents that are attending are very active and are very supportive of the city ultimately forming an infrastructure financing district. So,
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Any more questions? No? All right. I think that is it for that piece. It doesn't look like we have anything else on the agenda. I think within commission calendars, future item requests, we don't have to take a move on that item. That was just informational, correct? Yeah. Okay. Does commissioners have anything else? No? All right. I think we're adjourned. Oh, move to adjourn.
I have a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Look at that. And we're adjourned.